let's transition back to the NFL and let's go to the city of Washington, the nation's capital, Chocolate City. And let's talk about the Washington Commanders, as the Washington Commanders had two recent hires. The Commanders hired Dan Quinn as their new head coach, and they brought in Kliff Kingsbury as their new offensive coordinator in Washington. So, when I heard the Commanders traded, or I'm sorry, when they hired, rather, not traded, when they hired Dan Quinn and Kliff Kingsbury, first, let's start off with Dan Quinn. When I heard they hired Dan Quinn, my immediate reaction was, this was a bad move. I didn't like the move at all. When you look at Dan Quinn, he was the head coach for the Atlanta Falcons from 2015 to 2020. His coaching record is not great. It's average. He was 43 and 42, so he won 51% of his games as head coach in Atlanta. His postseason record is 3-2, and overall he is 46 and 44, so he's won 51% of his games. But he is the coach who was the culprit of a 25-point lead loss in the Super Bowl. This is Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn was the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons that lost a 25-point lead in the Super Bowl to Tom Brady. And to me, I feel like the Commanders, they missed the mark here because it's an offensive league. Dan Quinn, he's a defensive coach, but even as a defensive coach, his moment that we saw in the playoffs this year was one of his worst moments as a head coach, period. Overall, he was a defensive coordinator for the Cowboys this past year. They gave up 48 to Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers. 48. So, as a defensive coordinator, I had my questions about Dan Quinn. I really, really did. And now you bring him in as your head coach. I feel like the Commanders could have went and got a Mike Vrabel or maybe even a Bill Belichick to run their football team. I don't like Dan Quinn as a head coach. He could be a coordinator, but not a head coach. And again, to me, you should hire an offensive mind. It's an offensive league. So I didn't like the move of them hiring Dan Quinn. I thought they could have did better and brought in an offensive guy. And then they followed it up and bring in Kliff Kingsbury. Now, I don't understand for the life of me how Kliff Kingsbury continues to get opportunities to coach. Like, he's never had a winning record. Nowhere he's been. Nowhere he's been, he's had a winning record. In college, he was the head coach at Texas Tech. And at Texas Tech, he went 35 and 40. So he won. He lost 87% of his games. Lost 87% of his games. So I just don't know how he keeps getting opportunities. And then with Arizona, he went 28, 37, and 1. So he won 43% of his games. Like, how does this dude continue to get jobs? I just don't understand. I don't understand for the life of me how he continues to get jobs. It just makes no sense. And while he was at Texas Tech, he won 47% of his games. My math was a little off. Been a little off. But I just don't understand how they keep getting these jobs and these job opportunities.